Y'all, today we need to talk about a controversy that's seriously been heating up over the past few days on Wizard101. So, a couple of days ago, just like every other year, they basically rolled out the Thanksgiving update for Wizard101, which isn't really anything that crazy. But one of the things that they always do for Thanksgiving is add a vendor right here in the shopping district by the name of Harvest Hannah. Now, what's different is that this year, people were mad about one of the items that Harvest Hannah has sold because they thought that she would no longer be selling it. And now Wizard101 has responded by removing Harvest Hannah. So I thought we would take a deep dive into this issue because I don't think it's an issue that only relates to a Thanksgiving vendor. I think this is an issue that relates to a lot of things in Wizard101. And hopefully we can keep it respectful in the comments because it's kind of a serious topic. But what item did people have an issue with that Harvest Hannah was selling? It was this item, the headdress. And I think I've seen people with different opinions on this. Some people look at it as like it represents Native American culture. Other people look at it more as appropriation, especially because it's kind of sold like a costume on Wizard101. And regardless of how you feel about it, right? I think people are rightfully upset because of the timeline of all of this. And I wanted to add that very important context in this video. Over the summer, there was an item that people were similarly upset about, but not for the same reasons, in Pirate101 called the Mask of Death. Now, the Mask of Death, it's supposed to be like a skull mask that you put on, and it's supposed to be, I guess, of like the Dia de los Muertos aesthetic. However, the skull was more black than white, and it was a full-on mask, and I think you can guess why that's kind of crazy. And I think Wiz made a very W decision by removing this item. That happened over the summer. They put out a statement saying why the mask was even in the game to begin with. Obviously, they missed the mark. They removed it. And a lot of people were saying, okay, so this is a problematic cosmetic item that you guys removed based on feedback. Why not remove other items that people have similarly found problematic, like the headdress that people have actually been complaining about because social norms have changed over the past few years. Now, a few weeks ago, Wiz responded saying that in the Darkmoor update, they've already put in a patch to remove the headdress item, meaning next year, this will not be a thing. With the Darkmoor update, it shouldn't have been a thing. And yet, after this accountability, I guess, that they say that they're taking after this Pirate101 fix and saying that they're removing the headdress from Harvest Hannah, November 2nd or 3rd rolls around, Harvest Hannah's in Live Realm. She is still selling the headdress, which a lot of people called out. They were like, you literally said this was problematic. You said you would remove it. Why is it here? Now, after this was like, called out in the Discord, people basically responded saying that they basically I guess they didn't realize based on the patch schedule that it would still be out. So now in Live Realm, Harvest Hannah is removed. They did some sort of I don't know, maybe emergency patch or whatever, something that I don't think took down the servers, but they removed this vendor. So you can no longer interact with her. You can no longer buy the headdress. I'm assuming that she will be back in a few days with the problematic item removed. Now, I think there's obviously two parts to this issue, right? How do you figure out whether an item is problematic, right? Because that's something that Wiz will have to navigate. This is clearly a world with a lot of cultural references, right? The spiral, it basically relies on cultural references to make new worlds, right? How do you toe the line? I think that's one question. The other question is, how do you prevent something like this from happening in the future? And I really wanted to tackle the second part of this question. This is just something I've noticed, and I'm not trying to really be like that guy just calling out Wizard101, but it really does seem to me sometimes that the various departments in Wizard101 do have an issue communicating changes, right? In an ideal world, Wizard101 as a company, or I guess as a game, would be a more well-oiled machine, right? If someone's saying that the Darkmoor update is removing this Harvest Hannah item, there should be a 0% chance that it goes in a Live Realm with this item. Clearly, they acknowledged the feedback, but they didn't communicate it to whoever needed to communicate it to, or they did, but that message wasn't received. And I think streamlining the whole process where the feedback from the community reaches Wizard101, that's very important. I think that's still something every now and then. I feel like you could have someone from Wizard101 read your comment, but there's still no guarantee that it reaches the right avenue. And I think that's something that Wiz has had a problem with in the past, right? You'll have someone listen to your feedback, but they're not in the department that controls the timeline on these, so you'll have no idea when the fix will come in. And to be fair, they did respond by removing Harvest Hannah kind of quickly, so they are obviously taking this issue seriously. And I think that it would have been much worse if the vendor was still here, right? At least they're listening. But I do think when you say that it's going to be removed and then it's not removed, that's something that really is avoidable. And that's the lesson that I think Wizard101 can learn from this. But I think the other issue at hand is actually the bigger one, right? I think this is something that we'll see with a lot of games in the future, but Wizard101 being one of the oldest games that a lot of people play, you'll see this issue with Wiz first. And that's this idea, right? That things that were okay maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe they weren't even okay, but people weren't equipped with maybe the words to give the right feedback about. Essentially, things that were more normalized 15 years ago, they simply are not going to be okay now. We're probably going to see the same issue with Fortnite. Maybe in 10 years, there'll be skins that we found appropriate in 2018 that we do not find okay anymore. And I think the Mask of Death item in Pirate 101 and the headdress in Wizard 101, they're both really two sides of the same coin, right? These are things that on paper, they weren't done intentionally to be offensive to anybody. They weren't done to equip people to be able to offend others, right? It wasn't like that from Wizard 101 at all. But obviously, because they can be used in ways that are more offensive or maybe more insensitive, they have to really like repair the mistakes of the past. And I am kind of curious where that line could possibly be drawn, because like, for example, right? I'm like, you know, South Asian. As an Indian, there's a lot of representation of Indian culture in both Wizard 101 and Pirate 101, right? You might see the Darajani Palace and Zafaria. You might see, like, I want to say there's like this world with tigers and stuff in Pirate 101 that are Indian. Right, it's called the world of Raja, if you guys have ever encountered that part of the Pirate 101 storyline. And, you know, they have pretty heavy accents, you know, like, they definitely are very obviously, like, you know, culturally influenced by India. But I don't personally feel like, you know, like this area or Raja, for example, in Pirate 101, I don't feel like it's, like, meant as a way to insult me or my culture. I actually feel more seen. I feel like there's a visibility to it all. Well, I don't think the answer in terms of avoiding this in the future is necessarily to avoid cultural references in general, because at the end of the day, I feel like this is supposed to be a game where you actually feel like a part of you could be represented even in this fictional universe, right? I think that's kind of the formula that Wiz has used, especially in the past. I'm sure we'll get a world one day that references every culture in the world, right? There will be one for every world, I think. And I think in towing that line, what Wiz has to be very, very careful to do, obviously don't, like, you know, dig into stereotypes and use that to inform your characters. I think they do a pretty good job of avoiding that in general. But also, I think they should tend to anyways be open to feedback and have like the mechanisms in place to respond quickly whenever they miss the mark. I think they kind of did that when they they referenced J.K. Rowling, for example. I think a lot of people had an issue with J.K. Rowling's, like, you know, spin-off Harry Potter series. I think it was like apparently referenced with the Fantastic Fight Fest event over the summer. Right, in Test Realm, they basically renamed the event because it was too close of a reference, I guess, to the Fantastic, like, Beast thing. I don't really know much about J.K. Rowling or any of that, but basically, right, a lot of people look at J.K. Rowling these days anyways, compared to 10 years ago, very differently. And I feel like a cultural reference to Harry Potter, it hits a little different now, because now the author is very outspoken and very political. And that was another instance where I do think they responded to feedback very, very quickly. Almost like it was like, you know, like second nature, which was very nice. And I think as long as Wiz does do that, they'll be fine. As long as they don't communicate they're gonna do something and then go back on it, right? Either they need to be like, yo, this isn't really meant to be insulting, and just leave it at that, or they need to say they're gonna do something and actually do it. They can't do what they did this time and just say they were going to take action and literally do the opposite. I think that's why people are more mad than anything. I think there are parts of the Wiz community that could be a lot better about calling out Wizard101 too. I've heard a lot of people, like, I personally never bought the headdress. I've always kind of felt like it was a little weird, but just because someone bought it doesn't mean they were trying to be insulting, right? Just because, you know, Wiz put it in the crown shop doesn't mean they're trying to like monetize cultural appropriation. I think people need to see that mistakes are going to be made, especially given that they've been made 10 years ago when, you know, cultural norms were different. I think a little bit more understanding from the community in Wizard101, instead of just jumping to the worst conclusion and saying, oh, they're racist. Like, I feel like that's, I think, something that Wiz could do a little bit better about on the community end as well. I think that's just something that the Wiz community could do better about too. I think we live in a world where, you know, it's a little stressful. There's a lot of people that do have a lot of, you know, harmful views. And I think people jump to conclusions saying, oh, now Wiz is a part of that too. I just don't see any track record like that. It's always been a very inclusive game. And I think they're very, like, you know, motivated to keep it that way. And I think we should start at that baseline instead of being very, very angry the way I've seen some people act. I think that's also a part of it. Let me know what y'all think about all of this in the comments. I definitely think there's going to be people that don't even find the headdress problematic. And obviously there's going to be people that are happy that they at least removed the vendor, presumably to remove the headdress. I'd love to hear both opinions, but please keep it respectful in the comments. I look forward to reading y'all's thoughts. Drop a like if you enjoyed. A lot of people wanted me to make a video on this, covering it, because this might be a thing that happens in the future with other items. So hopefully this is a good place to give good, respectful feedback. I look forward to reading those comments. Stay awesome, y'all. See y'all soon. And yeah.